Okay, so realistically, even if with a brand new plant, we can be expected to pay about 34 cents a kilowatt hour with the savings and everything computed in.
Yeah, about 30 cents at current fuel prices.
Okay, thank you. I will yield now to other members. I'm sorry if I kind of took a while, but I needed to understand what that contracted capacity means and so forth. Thank you. Representative De La Cruz, you have the floor.
Mr. Young, good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning. Again, I go back to the operation provision of the PPA, which is 5.3A. And let me just read the last sentence of this provision. And this is on page 17 of the contract. It states that nothing in this article shall require CUC to purchase any power produced by the plant beyond the contracted capacity. So, my interpretation of this is, you mentioned earlier that the demand load at present is about 30 megawatts, or a little over 30 megawatts. Correct?
Yes, sir.
The contracted capacity is, as you stated, 50 megawatts. Correct?
Yes, sir.
This is from the new plant. This is the base load generating capacity, or the contracted capacity. The specification in the contract, I'm sure you would agree that is not clear as to what type of engine and the configuration of the engines. We don't know whether engines will be supplied based on 10 5-megawatt units or 5 10-megawatt units. Is that correct so far? We don't know.
Yeah, it is correct.
Okay. Mr. Young, can you explain to the body what is a nameplate capacity and what is a production capacity based on your professional?
Okay, the nameplate capacity is that capacity that's on the engine. Normally every engine has a nameplate and it gives information like the model number and the nameplate capacity. Now the nameplate capacity sometimes is deceiving because that nameplate capacity is based on a ISO standard 3046 and that standard says that, or basically says that that engine can operate or can supply that load or that is rated at that capacity based on ISO standards 77 degrees Fahrenheit, 30% humidity. So it's for cooler countries. So an engine like that may have that capacity, for example, in a country like Germany where it's cooler, or in Europe. However, in the tropics, we have what is called a D-rate capacity or an operating capacity. A lot of times we find that the engine will not operate at that nameplate capacity continuously. And sometimes it has to be derated.
Okay. Going back to the 5.3A provision, and I read the last sentence, and I'll read it again. Nothing in this article shall require CUC to purchase any power produced by the plant beyond the contracted capacity. So my interpretation of this provision is that if the contracted capacity is 50 megawatts, and let's say a company that is offering renewable energy wanted to sell power to CUC, and because CUC's load demand is only at 30 megawatts, which means we got 20 more megawatts, right, that we need to purchase before we can actually say to this company that's offering renewable alternative energy, solar for example, before we can say to them, okay, we've reached 50 megawatts and therefore we can accept your power, because the contract only calls for 50 megawatts according to the PPA. So anything over 50 megawatts we can purchase wherever we want. Is that correct so far?
Yeah, that is correct.
But the problem now that we look at is if our load demand is only at 30 megawatts, can we say to this alternative renewable energy company, yes, we can accept your power? Can we say that to them? Based on this provision, the 5.3.
I think there's a legal, there has to be a legal conclusion to that. It's not very clear in the contract, but the new plant can only sell whatever the demand requires. Like your question say, if the demand is 30 megawatts and the capacity of the new plant is 50 megawatts, obviously they can only supply 30 megawatts if that's the load, nothing more.
Right. But again, we're looking at maybe going into purchasing alternative renewable energy. From what we've heard so far, I understand that there's an MOA for, I believe, 20 megawatts of solar power. How would that fit into this PPA that holds basically CUC hostage from purchasing this other type of power generator?
Privilege.
Point of clarification or privilege?
The
So
question,
recognize.
I'm sorry. The question being asked is more of a legal question. Maybe that's something we should ask the attorneys as opposed to the engineer.
To clarify that, Mr. Guerrero, earlier before you came, the council did pose that questions that concern that there may be, legal questions or legal terms rather than engineering terms that could be used. I think the chair ruled that to allow the witness to answer if he can, and if he can't, just plain and say out, I can't. That's a legal question, and I am an engineer. I can only speak to a technical issue. So that has been acknowledged and clarified. So if Mr. Wong can't answer it, then so be it. But we did say we were going to continue with our questionings, and it would be the witness that can choose to answer or not.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Continue, Rep. De La Cruz.
And so, what is your professional opinion, Mr. Young, on such a scenario, if that should ever come up to question?
If we're gonna have other renewable energy sources, then the energy provided by the new plant will be lower than what is anticipated. But like I said earlier, the load now, the current peak load is around 30 megawatts. It doesn't even, it's not even enough for a 50 megawatt plant to run continuously at base load. Unless sometime in the near future there's a new load comes up, a mega casino, a mega hotel, or a shipyard, something like that will take the load above 50 megawatts. But I think for me, it's not, the language is not clear for me in the PPA, and I think that should be addressed at some time.
Thank you.
Representative De La Cruz, maybe it is. Can I take him to a relevant part of the contract that discusses what you've just asked?
Yes, and then may I continue after you?
You may actually pose the question, but let me just refer you to Article 6.1 in specific, and then you can continue with that, because 6.1 specifically states that Sdllc shall agrees to sell electricity to CUC, and CUC agrees to take and pay for the contracted capacity, which I think is relative or relevant to your questioning, and you may proceed.
Right. So again, this provision 6.1 and 5.3a merely states that CUC will have to pay the contracted capacity, which is 50 megawatts. Again, I ask you, Mr. Young, if this PPA is consummated, and apparently it has been signed, so now the question is, what do we do with these companies that want to sell renewable energy to CUC? Is there a chokehold on these companies? In other words, they are being blocked from tying into CUC's grid because before they can even try to sell power, they are going to be told that, well, we haven't reached the excess 20 megawatts yet from this company, Sdllc. We need to reach that additional 20 megawatts. In other words, our load demand has to satisfy 50 megawatts before we can entertain you into selling your power into the CUC grid. Am I correct?
I think the language has to be cleaned up. Even from the engineer standpoint, this 6.1, it says Sdllc agrees to sell electricity to CUC, and CUC agrees to take and pay for the contracted capacity. We're not buying the capacity, we're buying the energy. Capacity is in megawatts. It's a unit of power. What we are buying from Sdllc is not power, we're buying energy. People use these terms loosely, and unfortunately it's very loose language here in the contract. It should be, and CUC agrees to pay for the contracted energy, and they have to determine how much.
So in your own words, do you believe that the language used in this PPA is not correct, or maybe deficient at best?
From the engineering standpoint, or from utility standpoint, even utility standpoint, we're not buying the capacity, we're buying the energy. I don't know why it's written CUC will pay for the contracted capacity. The capacity is 50 megawatts. The energy is 50 megawatts multiplied by 24 hours a day, multiplied by 365 days a year. It comes to kilowatt hour, which is energy. So,
Yeah.
Are you sure? Are you sure you're correct?
100% sure.
Well, can you look at 6.3 and tell me if what you're saying is correct?
SDL shall deliver the entire power plant output.
And we can read it for the record. It says, Sdllc shall deliver the entire plant power output, in parentheses, net of plant usage, to CUC at the delivery point on the outgoing line consistent with the specifications and the operating parameters. And it is acknowledged that the plant shall operate as baseload plant.
What that means to me is it's going to be 50 megawatts multiplied by 24 hours a day multiplied by 365 days a year.
That's what it means to you?
That's what it means.
That's what we are buying. Is that what it means to you? That is what we are buying.
Yeah, that's maybe what we're buying, but the problem is that output is more than excess of what is required by the current demand or the load.
Exactly. Now you have 6.1 saying that Sdllc agrees to sell, and then you have 6.3 saying that they shall deliver the entire power output of 50 megawatts times 24 hours times 365 days a year. That is what the contract is saying. Is that correct?
That is what I see.
Thank you.
And, Chair, yeah? And that's what I've been trying to bring across all this time. In that Saipan Development LLC is first and foremost in CUC purchasing power by any entity. Anyone coming in later on and saying, I want to sell you wind power, I want to sell you solar power, but first CUC must exhaust all the capacity first from this one company, Saipan Development LLC, before CUC can even think about entertaining Company X or Company Z in purchasing their renewable energy. In other words, CUC and the Commonwealth are stuck in purchasing 50 megawatts of power, whether we need it or we don't need it. Whether our load demand is only 30 megawatts and we have a 50 megawatt capacity, we have to pay. And again, it's Saipan Development LLC that is priority here. That's why they got the exclusive contract. That's why all these provisions are put in there to protect Saipan Development LLC, not to protect CUC, not to protect CUC's ratepayers. It's Saipan Development LLC that is being protected here. In other words, the CNMI is going to be left holding the empty bag. In other words, the CNMI is going to be stuck with the short end of the stick in this deal. This is what we're trying to get across. Mr. Young, my next question centers around the executive or the acting executive director. To your knowledge, is Mr. Fletcher an engineer? And what type of engineer is Mr. Fletcher?
I'm sorry, I don't know exactly
That's okay.
his background.
That's okay. Our understanding is that Mr. Fletcher is not an electrical engineer. He is a water and wastewater engineer. And my concern is, and I will pose the question first, did the governor or Mr. Edward Buckingham ask you for your advice or your opinion during these discussions or negotiations for this power purchase agreement that was signed?
If I can put it this way, I had no communication with the governor or the Mr. Buckingham during this period.
Okay. Did you have communications with Mr. Fletcher with regards to this PPA?
Yes, I did on a number of occasions. He asked me some questions and I answered it. But I don't know if that information stayed with him or it was passed on.
After August 3rd, when this agreement was signed by the governor and Mr. Buckingham, did you have discussions with Mr. Fletcher on the issue?
Yes, when I came back from vacation, I was back on August 24th, and I was back in the office on the 25th. We discussed some points on the PPA with Mr. Fletcher.
Okay, so never at any time did you have discussions with the governor and the former Attorney General, Mr. Buckingham?
No, sir.
You know, it's very interesting because if I was Mr. Buckingham or Governor Fitio, I would try and ask somebody in the Commonwealth that is well versed on the technicalities of power plants.
The question is stating his opinion. We're here to get the facts. You know.
Mr. Chair, I think that Mr. Young is more than capable of answering based on his professional and personal opinion. I don't know why Representative Guerrero is trying to put a stoppage to the line of questioning.
I'm not trying to put a stoppage to the line of questioning.
What are you trying to do?
What I'm trying to do
Order,
is stop
order,
you from...
Back to our meeting. Representative, do you have, you raised a privilege point. Please state your privilege.
I'm just stating the point that the questions are fine. I have no problem with the questions. Where I do have a problem with is where Representative De La Cruz is stating his opinion on the matter. This is not a place for hearsay or for opinions. We're getting the facts, and That's all it should be. Yeah, all I'm asking for is we get the facts. We shouldn't state our opinions.
So noted. Representative De La Cruz, please take note and continue with your questioning.
Thank you, Chairman. And again, Mr. Young, based on before and after August 3rd on that signing of that PPA, you had discussions with Mr. Fletcher. Is that correct?
Yes, informal discussions when I got back.
Did you believe prior to August 3rd and after the signing that we needed this new power plant for the CNMI, particularly for Saipan, the island of Saipan? Let me clarify that. Did you believe that we needed a diesel power plant for the island of Saipan?
That question is quite broad, and maybe I'll answer it this way. Let's say that the life of the existing plant or the existing diesel plant is a face of the clock. A face of the clock. The question from a utility standpoint is, when is the best time to replace this diesel power plant? And let 12 o'clock be the end of the useful life of this plant. Let 12 o'clock be that time. So the question I would ask myself is, what is the best time to replace this plant? Utilities throughout the world, or the practice is around 11 o'clock. However, say at around 8 o'clock, on this clock, 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, an opportunity comes by to build a new power plant to supply, for example, a new mining industry or a mega casino or a shipyard. Then it's no longer just a utility decision. The government is drawn into this kind of project, even the stakeholders. But the thing is, I don't know at this time if we are going to have a shipyard and the shipyard is going to be supplied by the new power plant. I don't know if that's for certain is going to happen. But if we just replacing another diesel plant with another diesel plant, the practice of utilities is you do it around 11 o'clock. For the last 3 decades, utilities around the world, they try as much as possible to delay or even avoid building new power plants and power distribution and transmission networks, because the cost is enormous, especially to developing governments of countries and small island countries. However, I want to make clear, if the opportunity exists, like I said, to build a new plant to supply a new load that we can't meet right now, then it's a little bit different. Then other stakeholders are brought in to make the decision. That's the way I would look at it and answer that question.
Thank you, Mr. Young. You mentioned quite a bit about these different maybe I would say opportunities to the Commonwealth. You mentioned the shipyard repair facility. The PPA that was signed did not mention one word of a shipyard facility. So that's out of the question. The PPA is solely for the construction and installation of a 50 megawatt power plant. You stated also that in most countries, they're not running around trying to replace their power plants for the sole purpose of just replacing a power plant. It is quite evident from your testimony and as a professional in your field that at this point in time, given the state of the Commonwealth, and where we do not see any new development, if you will, a shipyard facility, we don't see that. We've heard that, but we're not seeing that. And so my question now, Mr. Young, is what is your take on the existing power plant number 1? Is it efficient at this time? Is it in good running order? Are we needing additional rehabilitation work? What is the capacity of our existing Saipan power plant number 1? And will it take us over the hump? Will it take us maybe another 6, 7, 10 years? And of course, with regular maintenance being done, would that get us over just until we can find something else that would replace this baseload power plant that we have? Please.
I think a number of CUC officials in the recent past have made statements that the existing plant has a life of approximately 7 to 10 years. We came about with that number after assessments done in late 2009-2010. However, in 2011 we pumped a lot of money and work into improving the units at Power Plant 1. So we revised that assessment, and now the assessment is the Power Plant 1 has a remaining life of 10 years or more.
10 years or more. With regards to efficiency, can Power Plant 1 become more efficient than it actually is today? Cooling systems, are we up to date with cooling systems so that the engines operate more cooler, operate more efficiently, getting away from buildup of the internal parts in the engines?
Okay, the fuel efficiency for Power Plant 1, the best engines there are doing slightly above 15 kilowatt hours per gallon. The efficiency could be raised if we replace the radiators or the cooling system on Power Plant 1 on a number of our engines. And we have a current project that's funded by ERA to replace the radiator sets. Because diesel engines, their best efficiencies is attained when you run the engines at 80% load or better. At 80% load. Right now we're running between 60 to 70% because of the radiators are short. But if you want to compare power plant with other plants on the island, on the islands of Saipan, it is the most efficient plants. We have newer engines in Rota. They are Wallon engines that came in much later, and they still lag Power Plant 1, even though Power Plant is not up to its best yet. We have new engines in Rota. At one time the efficiency was slightly better than the Power Plant 1, but now Power Plant 1 engines, the fuel efficiency is higher than Rota as well. And the engines in Rota is just a year old. The engines in Tinian, the two engines, they are Wallon engines, 5.5 megawatt each. The efficiency is much lower than Power Plant 1. So is Power Plant 4 and Power Plant 2. They're all below Power Plant 1. So your question is, can the efficiency of Power Plant be raised? We expect the efficiency to increase after next year, because that is towards the end of next year, or 2013, because that is when we're going to replace the radiators through an ERA grant.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Mr. Chair, at this time I will yield for other members to ask the questions.
Thank you, Representative. Any other members? Representative Sablan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What a step back further to your testimony. Is there a significant difference between operating a 50 megawatt capacity plant continuously versus a 50 megawatt plant that is operating at 30 megawatt capacity because of low demands? And I guess what I'm trying to get a picture here is the new power plant calls that it operates at 50 megawatt continuously, knowing that our current demand is only 30 megawatts. Under this PPA, my understanding that CUC still needs to pay the difference as if you operate it differently. Is that what I get from your testimony? Or is there a difference in operation costs?
The operation cost is about the same, but the reason why you would want to operate a plant at its at base load is you produce. It's to do with the utilization of the equipment. You maximize the use by putting out the maximum output. Thereby your sales is greater, your profit margin is greater. But when you have a plant that's operating on variable load, it's just a little bit more work. Your engines don't run at their best efficiency levels. But the cost comes out to the same.
But you said because of profit consideration. So let me ask you this: the two types of scenarios, in whose best interest is it that the 50 megawatt plant capacity operates continuously versus a plant that operates and provides power or energy per demand of the customer?
Well, the owner of the baseload plant would benefit more, because a plant that's, for example, the Power Plant 1 now, we have to operate with a spinning reserve. That means when you operate with a spinning reserve, you don't operate at full load. And the reason for that is to allow, in case one engine of a group of engine trips out automatically, and then the spinning reserve will pick up the load that's been dumped by the engine that went out. But your question is, it is more beneficial for the owner of a base load plant than a variable load plant.
Okay, so let's go back then. So what's called for in the PPA that CUC pays for the capacity, operating capacity? Is in the best interest of the power plant owner? versus versus a plan that operates and provides pursuant to demand. And again, what I'm trying to get here is, if the demand is only 30 megawatts, and CUC and its customers is obligated to pay for the full megawatt operating capacity, I'm assuming that there are significant costs, fuel costs. Am I correct? That's why I asked, in whose interest is it to operate the plant at full capacity, even when the demand for the customer is only at 30 megawatts?
Well, if I can put it this way, if the load is going to be 30 megawatts, the fuel cost will match the 30 megawatt load. However, if we have to pay the price of 50 megawatts when we consume 30 megawatts, that means the rate will be higher.
Thank you. Want to continue? All right. I don't know whether you've looked into it, because you mentioned the shipyard. Would a shipyard demand for power run up to 20 megawatts?
Large shipyards consume a lot of power. I don't know what the plan is, or if a shipyard will be built for that matter.
Has anybody at CUC looked into how much a shipyard would demand or would require in terms of megawatt or power?
I don't think so. Anybody looked into it yet.
Because everybody connects the need for this new power plant with the shipyard. And if our existing facilities right now are capable at producing what the new power plant is supposed to provide at 50 megawatts, and our current demand is only at 30 megawatts, the only logical conclusion is that if we have this shipyard, that our current power plant will not be able to provide or supply with the required power demand. So again, has anybody looked at how much a shipyard would demand in terms of power?
I think no one at CUC looked into that yet. I don't think so.
But in your professional experience, if you look, you deal with industries, hotels, and all that. A major hotel, would a major hotel require 20 megawatts of additional power?
That would be, like I said earlier, a mega hotel. 20 megawatts of power is a lot of power.
Yeah, I mean, if everything that's on the island right now is only the load demand is only at 30.
Some of
this new development's gotta be huge, super mega.
Yeah, I don't know if you are aware, sir, that a lot of the hotels self-generate at the moment. They self-generate because power in the past was very unreliable, and some of them are still clinging to their own plants.
Okay. Let's go. Sure, are you?
Thank you, Representative Guerrero.
Hi, Mr. Fong, how are you?
Fine, thank you, sir.
Just a simple question. If everybody on the island, including the hotels and whatnot, plugged in to CUC, would 30 megawatts be sufficient?
Well, the unconnected load on the island, CUC ran some numbers, it's just around 10 megawatts. That's the unconnected load. So if you add the unconnected load to the existing peak load, it'll raise it up to about 40 megawatts or thereabout. The available capacity on island CUC's power plants, including standby plant, is like 60 megawatts. There's some units undergoing maintenance, it'll go as high as 70 megawatts. But even if everyone is connected, the load is going to be approximately 40 megawatts.
Well, can the new plants handle 40 megawatts? Or you're saying that their maximum load is 60?
No, the new plant, the maximum would be 50.
No, I know the new plant, the maximum is 50, but with the current plants, the maximum is 60 or 50 or 40 or?
The available capacity is, including the units that are on maintenance right now, the available capacity is over 70 megawatts.
Okay.
Now, in 2009, the peak load was 45 megawatts, and we supplied that easily in 2009.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Guerrero. Representative Teptep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I only have a few questions to Mr. Wallon. I'm looking at your email dated July 13th to Robert Young. Counsel, do you have that in front of you? So that I'm going to try to run through some dates for us, and I'm going to try to ask you a question on what you had already provided, such as the remaining lifespan, in your opinion, of the PP1, the power plant, one that we have, as you mentioned, 10 years.
Representative, could you let us know what date you're referring to, which email?
July 30th.
Thank you, Representative.
Probably try to go backwards, but I want to use your analysis of the clock. And, if there's the possibility that the 50 megawatt that has been signed could be good for the CNMI, depending on how you look at it, but I want to use your analogy of the clock. Because now if we go backwards, I'm going to start from August that this PPA was signed, taking into consideration a lot of what has been said. And then what we found is that in December of last year, we found from the recent testimonials from AG that they became aware, this is the CNMI government through the Attorney General in his testimonial earlier, found or became aware of a possible PPA and a possible shipyard. This is in December. From December to about April of this year, the AG examined possible, these are all a lot of preliminary drafts and things of that nature of the PPA. And in May, they continue that. Inclusive in June, the special counsel for the governor also had the opportunity to examine the draft or possible PPA, which was signed in August. And within a lot of those recommendations, as they went through the process, they also, what they termed high-level speculations on some of the provisions within the PPA. And they even termed significant concerned areas or significant areas of concern. In July, there was draft. They they came with some sort of a final draft. This is in July, relative to part of why I asked that you look at the year. Although you were on vacation, you were able to provide some feedback. And within that July time frame, they also had the people involved had meetings and meetings, and also the AG office asked or requested that they need to fully, well, the AG in July, I guess in their legal opinion, provided that this is a good PPA. These are all draft. In August, it was signed. So in July, based on the information during your vacation, you had some, I guess, minor communication with CUC. In CUC's testimony through Mr. Fletcher, they were also asked, and this is sometime within that time frame, June to July, some feedback. And I'm assuming that part of the feedback came through that email. That's only part of the whole PPA in the area of engineering, or for that matter, just the mechanical aspects of these engines. So my question is very simple. From December to about June, before you went on vacation, were you asked by anybody, CUC or any of the CNMI government that may have been participating in this formulation of the PPA, were you asked to provide input? Even prior to your vacation?
I was asked by Alan Fletcher and economist.com, the CUC's consultant. I was asked questions that you already have documented, emails. Those are the questions they asked. Nothing specific regarding the PPA, but these were just general questions. Yes, before June.
Before June.
Before June.
I guess what I'm saying is that we have an opportunity for a possible 50 megawatt. Never mind all the intricacies. I'm just asking because of your professional background, and that during the process from December, when the AG became aware of this possible venture, from December to about June, things were trying to be worked out, possible PPA, specifically for a potential or possible new 50 megawatt. And you were on vacation in about July? Yeah. So before you went on vacation, so my simple question is that, were you asked to provide some sort of a feedback? It doesn't matter what. I guess I'm assuming that there would have been a possible question to you, being the professional person at CUC. Were you asked to provide some sort of feedback relative to a possible PPA for the CNMI, or a possible new generator for the CNMI?
Yes. I was asked by Alan, and I specifically remember he was asking me about the production cost of Power Plant 1.
That would be about base also, that's before your vacation?
Before the vacation.
Okay, and then during your vacation you continue to have some sort of communication, I mean, not
Yes.
oral communication?
Yes,
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Rep. If there's no objections, may the chair ask a few questions? Mr. Fong, one of the provisions under this contract talks about CUC's review of the plans and the designs provided for by Sdllc. I just want to read one of the provisions. If you would kindly go to page 12, at the bottom of the page, Article 3.3 talks about monitor progress. And I'll just read it for the record so you can read it from you, and you can read it on as well. It says, CUC shall have the right of review and approval of the basic engineering designs and plans prepared by Sdllc for the plant in terms of its compliance with the prescribed standards and specifications, to ensure that the designs and plans will not adversely affect the safe and secure operation of the CUC grid, and to ensure efficiencies and plant life. If CUC has not commented on such designs or plans or specifications within 20 days from the date of receipt by CUC, then such designs and plans shall be deemed approved. Any design changes by CUC outside of the prescribed standards and specifications are subject to concurrence by Sdllc, and when applicable are subject to change order under Article 3.5. I raise this provision of the contract since you are probably the person that's going to end up reviewing the designs and the plans. First general question is this provision reasonable? I mean, is it consistent with normal power purchase agreements? And let me just state a few of the issues here. First is they refer to standards and specifications. I also understand other engineering terms in this case that are used are, what's that, industry standards? Is that an engineering term that would normally be used? And I see this, or the lack of the use of industry standards throughout the contract. I don't know of any reference to industry standards.